Hey, what's good, YouTube? This is Who Is Like God, and today we're going to be talking about Jesus' genealogy and how Jeconiah actually proves Jesus as a descendant of David. Now, if you're unaware, I've recently had a debate with an Old Testament only, Tanakh only Israelite or a Jew about being the Old Testament only and rejecting any proclamation of Christ in the community. And one of the points we talked about that he actually cut out was regarding Jesus being a descendant of David. His point of contention was that Jesus couldn't be a descendant of David because he descends from Jeconiah. His conclusion was that either at the resurrection at the end of days, either David himself returns and rules on the throne, or someone else is the Messiah through one of David's other sons, because David had many kids, but not through Jeconiah, because Jeconiah was cursed to have no more reigning heirs in the prophet Jeremiah. So if Jesus is descended from Jeconiah, Jesus is descended from the cursed king, how can he be the Messiah? He's disqualified. Or so he believes. Today we're going to be handling that and looking at that from what the scriptures actually teach, what the New Testament actually says. Shalom. So this video is going to show how even if the curse of Jeconiah was valid in the first century and it was eternal, how even then Jesus is still vindicated as a descendant of David, even if the curse was eternal. But there's an argument to be made that the curse was not eternal because after the exile, we see there's a restoration of the line of David through the descendants. Even though they're not kings of their land, they're highly exalted. So it's possible that God is telling the Israelites, no, even after the curse, after the exile, there's still hope for the line of David, that the Messiah will come even through Jeconiah's descendants. Read the book of Haggai. But even if the curse was still in the first century, even then Christ is still vindicated, as we'll uncover, through the virgin birth. Matthew 1:12 confirms that Jesus was the descendant of Jeconiah. It says, and after the deportation of Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, so on and so forth to Joseph, who was the father of Jesus. Now, the book of Luke also has a genealogy, which is different than the one in Matthew. Now, there's a couple different ways to interpret that. My understanding is that the Gospel of Luke's genealogy is through Mary, and the Gospel of Matthew is through Joseph. But the reality is this: Joseph is not the biological father of Jesus. So, Jesus being the son of Joseph, Joseph being the legal father of Jesus Christ, Yeshua, Jesus can say that he has a legal lineage that's connected to David's line. His father legally has this lineage of the tribal descent from David, but biologically he doesn't come from the loins of Jeconiah, so that curse doesn't go on to him. You see what I'm saying? The very objection that the Old Testament only Israelite was trying to bring is actually what the New Testament reconciles, because there is no biological descent from the cursed king. There is no biological descent from Jeconiah, no matter how you want to slice it. Yeshua is not biologically descended from the cursed king, because Joseph was not his biological father. Joseph was the stepfather, so to speak, of Christ, who was conceived by means of the virgin birth through Mary. Now, the Gospel of Luke's genealogy, I believe, is Mary's genealogy, which means Jesus is not descended from Jeconiah biologically, but he does have actual biological descent from David through his other sons. So Yeshua is this historical Israelite who has biological descent from David through his other sons, and illegally sent from the line of Solomon, Jeconiah, to him. So he has a legal claim without the biological curse, and a biological claim from David's other sons. And the thing about that is, we can sort of get into it. And Inspiring Philosophy did a great video about this, but when we look into Torah law, the book of Numbers, what we can see in Numbers 36 is that we know that in the instance where a man has only daughters and no male sons, the daughters get the inheritance. That's what we established with the daughters of Zelophehad. I made a video about that some time ago. But when the daughters get married and they marry the other their man, that inheritance actually goes to that man and to that man's tribe. You see what I'm saying? So the daughters get the inheritance if the father has no sons. But when she gets married, because a woman goes from her father's household to her husband's household, then that inheritance goes to the husband. We see this in Numbers 36, Verse 8, and every daughter who possesses an inheritance in any tribe of the people of Israel shall be wife to one of the clan of the tribe of her father, so that every one of the people of Israel may possess the inheritance of his fathers. So no inheritance shall be transferred from one tribe to another, for each of the tribes of the people of Israel shall hold his own inheritance. They were worried that since a daughter gets married and goes to her husband's household, if she marries outside of her tribe, then that tribe may lose their inheritance, because now that inheritance is going to the husband of a different tribe, if you catch what I'm saying. So the issue was worried that because of marriage and the laws regarding inheritance with daughters and getting married to a husband, because that inheritance goes to the husband, they were worried if she married a man from a different tribe. And that's why this rule came down, this statute came down, that you're supposed to marry within your own tribe so that your tribe never loses your inheritance. So since we have evidence that Mary had female relatives and no male relatives, we know Mary had, Jesus' mother, Miriam, had sisters and female relatives, but there's no mention of her having any brothers. On the foundation of being probabilistic, it would seem that this law about inheritance Mary would fall into. So based on all the evidence that we have, it does make sense that Mary, having no brothers, would be in a position where when she got married, that inheritance would go to Joseph. Joseph would be the legal heir of Mary's tribal inheritance under Torah law. And because there is no word for son-in-law in Greek, when the book of Luke records Joseph being a son of Heli, that's why we get that, it's son of Heli. There's no word for son-in-law. So instead of saying Joseph is the son-in-law of Heli, Joseph is the son of Heli, connecting Joseph to Mary's line because of the legal inheritance that he would be getting in that situation, again under Torah law, while understanding that there is no word for son-in-law versus son. So under that paradigm, it makes total sense that if Luke's genealogy is for Mary, as I believe, it makes perfect sense why Joseph would be listed. And what we would have is Jesus not being descended from Jeconiah. His very point where he's trying to disqualify Jesus is because he's descended from Jeconiah. No matter how you want to slice it, Jesus is not biologically descended from Jeconiah, so he's not the biological seed that was never promised to rule again, yet he has that legal association to that lineage and a biological descent to David from the other sons. So Jesus is a fully Davidic individual no matter how you want to slice it. The other interpretation is that the genealogy in Matthew is biological, while the genealogy in Luke is Levirate marriage. This is actually the interpretation that has some trajectory precedent in church history, with Eusebius and others. If a man married a woman and he passed away before they had children, that man's brother would actually marry the wife. And the first child they had would actually be in the name and lineage of the brother that had passed away. And the reason they did that was to prevent any kind of tribal identity, tribal inheritance getting just erased. So even though the kid would be the biological child of brother 2, he would be the legal descendant of brother number 1, if you get what I'm saying. So people suspect that Joseph had a situation of levirate marriage, which wasn't an uncommon thing for the Israelites, and that's why he was a biological descendant of Jacob in Matthew, meaning Joseph was a biological descendant of Jeconiah, while being a legal descendant from Heli through levirate marriage and having descent from David from both of his sons from that kind of way, from the biological descent as well as being legally connected to Heli and the descent from David through Nathan. All that is to say, no matter how you want to slice it, Jesus is never a biological descendant of Joseph because of the virgin birth, so he's never a biological descendant of Jeconiah, because Joseph was biologically descended from Jeconiah. But Joseph didn't physically produce Jesus from his own seed. It was a miraculous birth. So whether you take Luke's genealogy to be of Mary, as I do, or you take it to be the levirate legal lineage of Joseph, whereas Matthew is the biological lineage of Joseph, you have Yeshua being descended from David with a legal claim that rejects any biological curse, no matter how you want to slice it. So I hope this wasn't confusing, but it actually goes to show when you really study the objection on the basis of Jeconiah and saying he has to be descended from one of David's other sons. That objection is actually presented in the New Testament and reconciled by the New Testament. This is a point I actually made to the man I was debating, that what you're objecting is actually what you want to be the case, the grounds you're rejecting Christ, is actually answered by the New Testament. Jesus is not biologically descended from Jeconiah at all, which was the basis of your objection. He is biologically descended from David through Nathan, through his other son. So there is Davidic descent. And while he doesn't have biological descent from Jeconiah, the wicked, cursed king of Judah, he can legally say through his father or stepfather, this is his legal lineage, this is his legal inheritance, just like a son's inheritance is that of his legal father in levirate marriage. And the reason I want to say this is not only to be a resource to the body of Christ and actually truly answer those who object to Jesus being a descendant of David. The fact that Jesus, when we can establish, truly was a descendant of David, truly revolutionizes this whole conversation. We actually get to the root of this, and we see that Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach, was actually descended from David. The historical Jesus has Davidic descent. No matter how you want to understand the genealogies, the evidence, I think that Luke is for Mary and Matthew is for Joseph. The fact that we have someone in the first century while the temple stood who actually has real descent from David, based on what all the earliest sources, based on oral traditions, testify about this man before the first century ends in the Gospels and in the Apostle Paul, all these genealogies that they would have had been able to fact check the records of and fact check the people in Jesus relatives, and all these different type of things who would have known their ancestors, and during the time when these things would have been written, especially since the movement started in Jerusalem of all places. The fact that we have all this from the first century and seeing how this is actually reconciled historically, the fact we have someone truly descended from David who claimed to be the Messiah, who claimed to fulfill the scriptures, and then not only do things that logically fulfill the scriptures, as even they conceded. Even if you want to dismiss it, Jesus still rode in a donkey into Jerusalem, which is what Zechariah predicts, right? So when we actually have someone descended from David who claims to be the Messiah with the actual tribal descent, claiming to fulfill the scriptures, actually do things that the prophets predicted, then we have to look a whole lot closer and not just write it off. Because we have someone with the actual seed, the actual lineage that is claiming to fulfill the scriptures that we're looking for. The boxes are being checked off, so we got to look carefully. And when someone not only fulfills scriptures in his ministry, but the effect they have on the world totally changes the world as we know it to acknowledge Yahweh, and the effect we know the Messiah is said to have, Messiah ben David will have in the book of Isaiah and other scriptures. When we can establish all of this, it just makes it clear how real this actually is. It makes it easier to wrap your hand around how real this actually is, that a real descendant of David who's claiming to do these things, how high those odds are that are actually fulfilled, how real this really is, and how of God this actually is when someone who's doing all of this isn't just a Jew of unknown origin, but an actual descent of the royal lineage of the house of Judah in all verifiable historical probabilistic methods, who is doing these things. So it's food for thought. I want to make this video to respond to that. I said I was going to make a video talking about this, and I finally did. All glory and praise be to the Most High, who, as the ancient Israelites and the ancient church realize, is triune. Y'all be blessed in the body of Christ. And I'll see you in the next video, right? Peace and blessings.